What's up, everyone? How are you doing today? In today's video, I'll be talking about why I left the United States and moved to Brazil. A lot of people are curious about what life is like in Brazil for a foreigner. And I've never made a video like this in English. I usually make videos in Portuguese, but now I have this channel in English where I'd like to share some things with you. If you have any questions about Brazil or about the United States, let me know. But this is going to be a personal story, not a top 10 reasons to move to Brazil video. This is a personal journey of how I ended up here, and I hope you like it. So basically, I grew up a pretty typical, not that typical actually. I grew up in El Barrio, so I grew up in a Spanish neighborhood in Union City, New Jersey, right next to New York City, but on the other side of the Hudson River. It has a few nicknames, but one is Havana on the Hudson, so it has a huge Cuban population. At least initially, it had a huge Cuban population. A lot of Cubans started moving here in the 50s, and actually Fidel Castro was arrested in Union City in the 50s. He was campaigning for his future revolution in Cuba, but he was arrested in Union City. A little fun fact about the town. And then after the revolution, a lot of Cubans moved over here. And then in the 80s, have you ever seen Scarface, the Mariel boat lift? A lot of Cubans moved, kind of a second wave. And then other Latino groups, Dominicans, Colombians, a lot of Puerto Ricans, then Mexicans, Hondurans, a lot of different Latino groups. So I kind of grew up very close to Latino culture, but I didn't know any Brazilians. I didn't even know that they spoke Portuguese in Brazil. So I really knew nothing about Brazil, but I kind of knew a little bit of Spanish, enough to get by. I played baseball, so you kind of have to learn how to speak Spanish if you want to talk to your shortstop. Sometimes they come, right from Santo Domingo and to Union City, and if you want to have a conversation, it's in Spanglish. And then if you want to go to the bodega on the corner, you're going to have to talk a little bit of Spanish to get what you want. So I learned a little bit of Spanish, just enough to have fun. I guess I started learning a little bit more when reggaeton started becoming big. This is like the first wave of reggaeton. This isn't the wave right now, which is kind of becoming mainstream. This was still when reggaeton was still like underground music. Not underground, but getting out of the underground. So I'm thinking like 2003, Barrio Fino, Daddy Yankee. That song Gasolina was blasting in front of my house in a hatchback Honda Civic every day. So I started, and then my friend was a DJ too. So he's like, his dad is Cuban, his mom is Dominican, or forget the exact mix. But his grandfather had a barbershop, and he was a DJ for like salsa parties and weddings. So he used to always take me along. He'd pay me like $20. I'd carry the DJ equipment and, just hear like songs from Hector Lavoe, Tito Puente, all those classic songs then a little bit of merengue. So I kind of got a Latino education, but still nothing. I didn't learn anything about Brazil. The first thing I remember about Brazil is probably watching them lose in 1998 to France. Zidane had those two headers. They won in '94 when Baggio missed the penalty, and it was in the Rose Bowl. Don't really remember that one. I was probably like 5 at that time, so I was a little too young to remember that one. And no one really watched soccer in my house or football. But then I remember watching the final, and even though they didn't win, I remember this Ronaldo guy, and they just had a really good Rivaldo, and I started following them a little bit. I didn't really watch in 2002. I guess the fact that it was on in Japan and Korea was kind of a weird time to watch, so I didn't really watch that much. But then I watched in 2006, I think it was in Germany, and they had a squad. They just didn't mark Thierry Henry on that free kick, but they didn't play that well in that World Cup. But that was a squad. That was a really good team. And I was working as an intern at the commodity exchange in New York City, where they still had those open pits where they would sell commodities. I worked I think I worked in the cotton pit or sugar pit. Yeah, and they're just like 50 bid at 22. And I would just have to record the trade. But anyway, we had a little like friendly pool where everyone got a team, and I picked Brazil. So I decided to cheer for Brazil. No one just wanted to mark Thierry Henry on that penalty kick, so whatever. But I guess that was the first time I started really following Brazil and started learning about the players, and I learned a few, not really any phrases, but I guess I started playing FIFA at the time as well, and sometimes they'd have some Brazilian songs on the soundtrack, and I learned like maybe the phrase "Jogo Bonito," which is the beautiful game, but that's about it. And then I went to college, University of Maryland. I think I was a junior, and I wanted an easy A because I needed to bump up the GPA. And I think this was only like a one credit class, like twice a week or something. It was Brazilian cinema, so I took a Brazilian cinema class. And I kind of got all the classic Brazilian films. I didn't speak any Portuguese, but I knew enough Spanish to pick up a few words here and there and kind of start to pick out a few sounds in Portuguese. And I think we watched Cidade de Deus, which is City of God. We watched Tropa da Elite, Elite Squad. We watched Central do Brasil, Brazilian Station, I think it's called in English. A lot of classics, a lot of classic Brazilian films, and I started picking up some things, some cultural things, and then that same teacher offered a class in Portuguese. I think this was now my senior year, and it was like an advanced Portuguese class, and I had never taken any Portuguese, and I just lied and said I did because I knew enough Spanish. And I wouldn't say that I learned too much Portuguese in that class, but it definitely gave me a few phrases, and it was kind of like the takeoff point. Okay, now I want to learn this language. So I started, this was like, no one, like this was way before, I don't know if this was before Joe Rogan was doing, when did he start doing podcasts? This is 2009. I'm curious to see when he started. But no one really watched podcasts, but I was listening to language learning podcasts. I know there's this podcast from University of Texas, and they taught you how to learn. It's called Tá Falado. They taught you basically Portuguese with the base in Spanish. So you basically take what you already knew in Spanish and apply it to Portuguese. So that really helped that podcast. But I still can't, besides my teacher, I don't think I had any Portuguese friends or Brazilian friends. So I didn't speak any Portuguese, but I started creating dialogues in my head, kind of imagining situations when I would use Portuguese. So, okay, the film class, and then the basic Portuguese class, which I got A in both of those classes, one of my few A's in college. Studied economics. I'm not sure why, but then I graduated and went home back to New Jersey. Didn't really have much to do. I worked a few kind of summer jobs, nothing too crazy, and just camp job. I was teaching basketball. I think I was coaching basketball camp or something like that. And then they had the World Cup that year as well. That year it was in South Africa, and there's this city. City's pretty famous because it has an international airport, Newark, and there's a neighborhood in Newark called the Ironbound, which, if you've ever seen Sopranos, that's where Tony Soprano's family is from originally. And now the Portuguese moved in there to work in the iron industry, and then the Brazilians came after that. So it's a huge Brazilian community about 15 minutes from my house. And I had been one time to the Portuguese festival, which is in June, and then I knew that there was something going on there. So I went with my friends. We kind of did this during the World Cup where we try to go to a different bar that represented the country that was playing. So we went to a Colombian bar, Mexican bar. They actually went to a bar from Ghana. This was after Brazil had lost to Netherlands, so I didn't go. But we found this bar. This first game was against Ivory Coast, and we went to this city, and it's a pretty bustling city, but it was dead silent. There was no sound, nothing, no noise on the street. And I asked some guy, like, is there any bar where we could watch the game? It seems kind of dead here right now. The game's about to start. And he just kind of pointed that way. I don't think he spoke English. But he understood. Over there, para lá, você vai ver. Like, over there, you'll see the bar. And I was like, you sure? I don't really see anything. He's like, We'll see by a shot. Like you can't miss it. And he started laughing. So we started walking to this bar, and it was called Boi na Brasa, which means like cow on the flame, something like that. I guess boy would be not really cow, would be bull, or not bull, but some whatever. It's I'm not really gonna get into farming right now, but we went to this place. And I was with my friend, and it was wild. It was just crazy. Like I've never seen people this passionate about soccer, really about life before that. And they had the whole game was announced in Portuguese. I'd never heard a game announced in Portuguese, and they had that classic Brazil, Zil, Zil, Zil. That game they won. And after they had a band and made a bunch of friends, this was like the first time I'd ever really interacted with Brazilians. And then we went back, I think two more times, but the third time they lost the Netherlands. You know, another time they didn't really mark too well in the penalty box, but that's another story. And yeah, that was my first encounter with Brazilians. And then I would go back to that neighborhood every now and then, you know, go to some bars. And one time I met some, this was, they have like they have a Brazilian Independence Day, which is around the first week of September. September 7th is the official day. And they have a party in Newark as well. And so I went to that Brazilian Day, and they also have one in New York. I don't think I went that year, but I made some friends, and they invited me to their party in New York City the next day. They lived in Spanish Harlem, and basically, not all of them, but most of them were dog walkers, which is a pretty interesting, you know, niche. Brazilian dog walkers, but you know, they work and they live in Spanish Harlem, which is about 110th Street, and they go down to the Upper West East Side, probably the richest zip code in the United States, and make a lot of money walking dogs, watching dogs sometimes, and walking dogs. It's kind of funny. You think, oh, I'm going to get into banking, JP Morgan, maybe at that time they're making 100K coming out of college, and these dog walkers were making 150K easily. So it was pretty funny. So we had a lot of good times in that apartment because they would, you know, they were living in New York, making some money, and we'd go to the bars afterwards, and we'd have barbecues. There was one bar called Miss Favela, which we'd go every Sunday and no, every Saturday. Every Saturday was Pagode Day, which is basically a, if you're not Brazilian, it's kind of like a style of samba that's not really doing it justice, but I'm not going to get into that in this video. And every Saturday we'd go there, and the few phrases I had in Portuguese, now I, you know, starting to practice a little bit more. And I guess when I started hanging out with my friends that didn't speak any English, because when you have a friend that speaks English, you know, if you don't know what you're going to say, then you just go to English. But then I started hanging out with a few of my friends that didn't speak any English. Then you really had to go from pantomime to speaking in Portuguese. And that was kind of the shift. And this was like 2011. And then I just, you know, it's kind of funny. Why would they invite me to their house, their barbecue? It kind of seems weird because in the United States, we're not like that. But if you ever met Brazilians, they're pretty welcoming people, and they love to show you their culture, and they also love to have a foreigner, even though it was in New York City. But because I was in that little Brazilian bubble, I was kind of the token foreigner. And you know, having a gringo, as you're called at their party, is kind of funny for them. It's kind of having like a talking talking parrot that just can say a few phrases. Hey, gringo, say this. Gringo, say that. And oh yeah, gringo. So it was a fun experience, and it was kind of fun being the token gringo at that time. But yeah, I'm still friends with them till this day, and we haven't stayed in touch as much because most of them are still in New York City or different parts of Brazil. But that was a great experience. I played soccer a couple times a week with one of my friends who's now like a big influencer in Brazil. Chaim is like I wouldn't call him the Andrew Tate of Brazil, but you know, maybe that would be the easiest way for someone who doesn't know him to. And he went to Penn. He's an Ivy guy, so he's a smart kid, smart guy. But we play soccer once a week. I actually met him in Central Park at a Marcelo D2 concert, and that was funny because Brazil and the Brazilian currency was very strong at the time. So the Brazilian currency was like 3 to 1, which now it's like almost 6 to 1. So a lot of Brazilians were there spending money. So it was pretty easy to meet Brazilians. The Brazilians were out having a good time. But I still really didn't have any reason to go to Brazil. I was in New York, so I had learned Portuguese without ever having visited Brazil. which is a topic for another video. And I started teaching at a school in New York City. I taught a lot of Brazilians. So that was another thing that took my Portuguese to the next level. Even though the methodology was supposed to be like immersion, you weren't allowed to speak Portuguese. I couldn't help myself. I wasn't going to pantomime when I could easily translate it for them. So I definitely, and I made a lot of friends. A lot of my students became friends. So we definitely had a good Brazilian crew in New York City at that time. But they started saying, "Hey, you should make some videos teaching and teaching English and talking about Brazilian culture because you have a pretty interesting perspective." And no one was doing this at the time. Maybe one or two people, but it wasn't a thing. Now it's pretty popular, but it wasn't a thing at the time. This is 2004, 2014, 2015. Actually, one of my friends who was doing it, he actually lives uh, pretty close to here. We hang out a couple times a week. He had a channel, and he invited me onto his channel, kind of a gringo talk show. We just talk in Portuguese about what we think about Brazilians. And it was kind of funny because I'd never been to Brazil, so my knowledge was kind of limited, but also kind of interesting because I only knew about Brazil through very specific context. And that was the show, and I got a lot of positive feedback from the video. People were like, "Well, Portuguese is really good. Your comments are really interesting. You should start your own channel." So I did. Actually, I started in 2016 when Brazil's hosting the Olympics. Rio was hosting the Olympics. I made some videos about how to make friends with gringos during the Olympics, and then I just started making videos, and kind of went slow in the beginning, but after 3 months, I made a video reacting to someone's English. One of the big YouTubers down here, made a video in English. I said good things about his English, so I wasn't, making fun of him or anything. And he actually shared the video. He's the biggest, I think he's now the biggest YouTuber in Brazil. He shared the video, and I went from like 30,000 followers to 100,000 followers in like a day. So that was kind of the beginning of my wow. Well, I had been working these, like, besides teaching, I've been working a sales job. It wasn't really good, and I left that job. Decided to go all in on my YouTube career, even though I was barely making any money at the time off YouTube. Now I have a language school, which definitely helps out. But it was just a leap of faith, and that was in December. In February, I decided to go to Carnival for the first time. So I was in Carnival in Rio, 2017. I was actually an interpreter for Marlon Wayans there. They kind of just, I was invited to like the box seats in Carnival. It's another story, but I was an interpreter for Marlon Wayans and one of the local celebrities, not local, she's a national celebrity, Sabrina Sato. And that was just a wild experience for my first week in Brazil. And then I would just spend 3 months in Brazil, 3 months in another country, usually United States. Sometimes I'd go to Argentina, I went to Paraguay, I went to Europe. And that was going on for a while, making videos, kind of living in the life of a, a maybe a B-list, C-list celebrity. I don't know. I don't really like being a celebrity, but it's kind of interesting. People sometimes stop me and ask for photos, which is definitely wild. Still to this day, it's been like 7 years, 8 years, and it's still wild to me. But I appreciate it. I like it. It's nice that people like what you do. But anyway, that's how I got here. There's a lot more to the story. I met my wife in 2001. We got married last week. No, not last week. Last month, 2 months ago in Rome. So that's another story. But that's how I ended up in Brazil. I guess part one of the journey. It's kind of interesting. I learned Portuguese without visiting Brazil. But I hope you liked it. If you have any more questions, let me know. Peace.